I think now we're going to turn our attention. This really focused on how to reach a mass audience, and through using a tool such as a video to really have an impact. But we're going to turn our attention now to a different, a more specific actor in the policy arena. And I've had two volunteers from our audience who kindly agreed to participate in a role play. So I'd like to welcome Werner Hermani, the director of Fundación Aru Bolivia, to come up and join us, and he's going to be playing the Minister of Finance, Paraguay. So Werner, Mr. Minister, please join us. And Mr. Fernando Massi, the director of CADEP, Paraguay, is going to be taking this opportunity to grab the minister's attention. I think the minister is in quite a hurry today, so he only has about 5 minutes to meet with Mr. Massi on this particular issue that these gentlemen will take us through. And this is just going to lead into a discussion on the floor about this type of interchange and how to really, what messages need to be communicated in this forum.
Okay. This is the first time I'm doing this. I don't know. My colleague at my center is actually the current Minister of Finance, but he's not yet. Mr. Minister, as you know, there has been massive demonstrations over the last weeks of the civil society in Paraguay against the Congress because of raising expenditures for the electoral commissions that were headed to the political operators and clientelism in Paraguay. This has been very important because it helps the Ministry of Finance, and also yourself. In terms of reducing and stopping all these type of waste expenditures that are currently going on in Paraguay, because these mass demonstrations made Congress stop the law in itself, and that was vetoed by the executive power, and they were about to lift the veto. So it's very important because you are running. Yes.
Please go to the point and tell me what we're going to do about it and how much it's going to cost me.
It's not going to cost you anything. You're going to be funded. Let me tell you this. Let me tell you what we are going to do with this. Because you're running a fiscal deficit and you don't know how to stop the Congress, because you know the Congress in Paraguay by constitution has more, they have more power, paradoxically, in a presidential system than the executive power, and they can do everything what they want with the expenditures. And you know what happened over the last 10 years, that they were increasing every year the expenditures and the current expenditures, especially for salaries and for political operators within the executive power, having so little space for expenditures in which the executive power could make the difference in terms of social expenditures, in terms of capital expenditures, and things like that. And you cannot, nothing with the veto, because with 51% of the vote, the veto will go out, right? So, this is an opportunity for this mass demonstration, is an opportunity for the following. You have to show the civil society that the abuse of the Congress is not only in this particular respect with the Electoral Commission, that the abuse is done every year when they discuss the budget at the Congress, and they finally pass the law, because that's the law that is passed. Is the Congress, it's not the executive power. So what I'm proposing is the following: do a short research demonstrating the budget project that are presenting every year by the executive power to the Congress, in terms of current expenditures, in terms of capital expenditures, and in the principal programs within those expenditures, how they are presented to the Congress, and how the final bill is approved by the Congress, and see the difference in between the current and capital expenditures, to see how they increase every year the salaries for people that don't add any productivity within the executive power.
Okay, so as my colleague in South Africa would say, don't talk about it, go do it.
No, what is the purpose of all this? let me.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you. So I'm sure some of you on the floor have some comments, and as I've explained to these kind volunteers, this is an opportunity for constructive criticism and learning. So I think that we can all learn a few things from the way that this role play played out. I think it took Mr. Massey about 3.5 to 4 minutes to actually come to the pitch, right? The so what. And I don't think it matters if you're talking to a minister or a journalist. And the attention span of journalists are a lot shorter maybe in some instances. But you've got to get to that punch a lot quicker, right? So I'm not sure if people want to comment from the floor. We have a few journalists in the room. Hans?
I just want to comment with a very concrete recommendation. If you do have time, and I know all of you are very busy, but if you do have time and you want an absolutely fascinating read, get a book by Stan Greenberg, which is called Dispatches from the War Room. And Stan Greenberg was the man that first advised Clinton in his campaign, which was a very imperiled campaign, you may remember, in 1992, and then later went on to advise Nelson Mandela. I think he actually writes about Trevor Emanuel as well. Tony Blair, Gerhard Schroeder, and I think in Peru as well, a particular campaign. And the ruthlessness of the political context when they test out messages and when they describe how they go out and test messages between, for Labour, a country that works out for all, they test this, and then they test another message, a country that works for all, not just the privileged few, and with that, not just the privileged few, they have an extra 5% in terms of the responses. So what I'm trying to say, the type of intelligent research that goes into that, Stan Greenberg originally worked on South Africa as an academic, I think at Yale, later went on to do a political consulting firm, and his colleagues, Rosner, etc., still travel the world. Rosner is currently advising Kenya, is advising one of the campaigns. If you really want an inside view on how these things work and how to pitch, it's one of the best things you can read. I'm happy to send that around later.
I guess to follow up on the fact that the pitch came quite late, I mean, I think it's always worth writing down what the 3 key things are that you want to say. And maybe we're doing book recommendations. There's a very good book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick, which is all about the kinds of aspects and nature of messages that stick in people's minds, that they remember, they come back to, that will influence them and change the way that they behave.
Anyone else from the floor?
I think that we're in a time when, I was just thinking about, as we talked about books, the book that came to my mind was Sound Bites and Spin Doctors. That we just, all communication is now in frames, and the frames are usually 30 to 60 seconds. If you can't deliver a message in 30 to 60 seconds, you're cooked. Because, I was talking to Dr. Louis Kasekende yesterday, and we were talking about when you go for these meetings at the UN or whatever, someone walks up to you and says, so what have you learned from the meetings? And, if you start saying, oh, well, you know, actually, it's where they'll say, oh, that was Dr. Louis Kasekende. Thank you very much, from Uganda, commenting on that. And they'll move on to the next person. So I think we have to develop frames. You know, right now in the World Bank, we have said for every analytical work you do, you must describe it in 165 characters. What's the main thing? And the economists and researchers really struggle. So they give me normally about 50 paragraphs. And then I say, okay, can you narrow it down to one paragraph? And then they probably give you like a page. Can you narrow it down to, half a page? And then out of that half a page, I take out, 165 characters. And they'll still say that, but you cut this, it could have been this, or, but eventually you get it. And I think that's the power of tweeting and things like that. It forces you to think about your message critically. If you had only 1 minute, what would you say about the research you've done? If it doesn't excite people in 1 minute, it probably won't excite them in, 2 hours. So I think we have to really take research to ask ourselves critically, what do I want to communicate in 1 minute? If you can't do it in 1 minute, you're done.
And I think for those of us who were trained in an academic way, this is a very difficult task because it goes against everything that we've been trained to do. And so I think the fear for a lot of researchers is that to try and condense a message in a tweet, you lose the core essence, or you miss out on the depth of the research that you really want to convey. And so this is going to be a skill, and to try and make that shift and to be able to be effective in both camps, both on the in-depth research as well as that soundbite of communications, is going to be a very, very tall task, but it's something we all, I think, have to get better at.
I'm a big fan of haiku, and I think tweets are actually too long. So, no, I mean, more seriously, just to comment on the film and on the role play. I mean, one thing that struck me about the film was that it's a very, very hard-hitting, emotionally grabbing portrayal of a problem. And I think anyone would think, yeah, children shouldn't be in prison. Now, the solutions that would prevent children being in prison are a bit more like our policy fixes, and they're complicated about when you intervene and how do you need to reform the whole criminal justice system, etc. So I would challenge someone to make a film about the things that you can do to keep children out of prison and get it into a few minutes that would be as emotionally grabbing. And similarly, in the tweet to the minister or the role play, getting over the problem is probably quite easy. Children shouldn't be in prison. But then laying out in your 2 minutes what can be done in any context is actually quite challenging. So I think we need to go one layer down from Hans's point about the Labour Party loves you and it hates the rich, because actually the kind of policy issues that we grapple with are just a bit more complex than Tony Blair's electoral messaging. So I think that there is a balance between the very short and the short enough, and actually, well, how do you convey still relatively complex issues? So the humanizing aspect is great, but there is a degree of complexity that probably won't turn into a very, very, very short 17-syllable poem, for example. Thank you.
For me, being an economist, it's a challenge to understand these things about media. And if we are looking for policy impact, then in impact evaluation literature, you should identify which is the treatment, which is the objective population, and which is the effect. It seems to me that the treatment is a combination of quality research and good communication until now. But I think that the most important, that another important part of that treatment to get policy impact, it's the ability to create institutional spaces for researchers to interact with policymakers. The great part of the role-playing is not the idea that is communicated to the minister. The great part of the role-playing is that the minister is actually talking to a researcher. And there were some intervention in this arena. When I was working at the IDV, the research department there have these encerronas that kind of forced ministers to sit and talk for about 2 or 3 hours to researchers about a policy agenda, about the challenges. And it's very important not only to have quality research, to have good communication, but also to create these spaces to have the opportunity of exchanging ideas.
I'm going to hand it back to one of my resource people here. I think Owen can also, through his experiences both in the UK and in other southern contexts, provide some insight as well.
Thanks very much. I was reflecting as I was watching the role play on time I spent in number 10 Downing Street working for Tony Blair. And one of my jobs was to be at meetings where people from the private sector or from think tanks or civil society organizations would be presenting exactly this kind of pitch to the Prime Minister. Not everybody gets to see the British Prime Minister, so these were quite important, or people who thought they were quite important and ought to see him. And one of the things that struck me time and time again was how ill-prepared they were. Very often people would come in, and perhaps it was, nervousness created by the situation. You're sitting in the cabinet room in number 10 Downing Street, you've got the Prime Minister sitting in front of you. The best people were very well prepared. Most people came in and fell to pieces and completely lost the opportunity to affect policy change. It was really very striking. And I know that hasn't changed recently because I was in a meeting in number 10 Downing Street with Prime Minister David Cameron the other day, and the head of a very large, well-known international NGO was there, was given her 2 minutes to speak, and she was rubbish. She hadn't practiced, she didn't know what she wanted to say, and she lost the opportunity to get her point across. So one message here is treat these, you get one moment when the spotlight falls on you, and you have to be ready to dance. And a surprisingly large number of people are not ready to dance when the spotlight falls on them. What does being ready to dance mean? I think we've often talked in the last couple of days about politicians as if they're all venal and corrupt and concerned only about votes and not about politics. That isn't my experience at all. The politicians I've worked with have wanted to change the world as best they can, but they are constrained by politics. You can't ignore the fact that they have to sustain a coalition to stay in power. So they're always judging, will this further my objectives that I'm trying to achieve in a way that doesn't use up too much of my political capital? It'll either make me more politically popular, that's an easy case, or it's going to be marginally unpopular, but it's manageable. It's something I can do and not burn too much of my support. So the questions they're going to be asking themselves are, first of all, what problems does this solve? And we had an example in the role play where there was too much about the problem and too little about the solution. But I've also seen cases where someone comes in with a solution to a problem that no one knows we have, that the politician hasn't got in their head. You just come in with this policy whiz, and it doesn't seem to be solving a problem. So the first question is, what problem will it solve? The second question politicians want to know is, who's going to oppose this? Who are the losers from this? You don't have to pretend there are no losers or no opposition, but they need to know up front who those losers are going to be, and are they people that we can safely ignore because they're never going to vote for us anyway? Is this going to actually help our political definition by taking on people we want to be taking on? But they have to know that you've thought about it and that you're ready to be able to explain it. Then they want to know, is the policy any good? Will this thing crumble? Will it actually work? Will the experts say, yes, this is a good idea, this government has done well to introduce it? So they want to know something about the kind of basic ideas of the policy. And they critically want to know how people will respond. Will the credible experts out there, the respected commentators, the professors at the universities, applaud this, or will they say this government is stupid? So how will people respond to this idea if they announce it? So you need, the message to a politician has got to be, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's how it's going to play for you. And you can normally get that done in 3 minutes if you've played your cards right. But the key thing is that it's very, very difficult to condense your message down. You've done maybe years of research, maybe this is your life's work, you've been working on this, and you're trying to reduce it to a tweet, to 140 characters. Okay, that's a very frustrating thing to do. well, then it's very important to have a whole set of different kinds of materials that go with that. You know, the best pitches I saw to politicians were where people came in and said, here's the idea, here's a one-page brief about it, here's the book I've written on this topic, which explains it all in more detail. And you hand it over to them. Now, the politician is probably not going to read the book. When I was working in Downing Street, the book would be handed to me, right? And Blair would say, tell me if this is any good. The book gives you credibility. It shows that you know what you're talking about. So you've got your top-line message that the politician hears, but you've also got the materials. They're increasingly things like videos, podcasts, websites, one-page briefs, those kinds of things that you also hand over to show that you've done your homework. Because what you're trying to do is show the politician that when you say such and such is a good idea, you've both thought about the substantive issues. Is it a sensible thing to do? Will it work? But also you've thought through the politics. They are listening when you give them your 140 characters. The question they're asking themselves is, could I explain this on the television? Right? That's the question that they're judging. Because they're trying to figure out, if we put this policy into place and I'm in Parliament or on television and I have to explain it, can I do it? And if you can't do it and you're the expert, then how are they expected to be able to do it? So you need to show them both that you can simplify the message and get it across, and that there's real content behind it that means that it's going to stand the test of time and stand up to scrutiny. So the kind of key thoughts about how to do this well are practice, 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 and really think about how it is you're going to convey this idea to a politician, because the way you convey it to them, they're judging whether they're going to be able to convey it more widely.
Great, thanks very much, Owen. Just before we turn our attention to the group exercise, which is where we're going to focus the second half of this session, I'm just curious to ask Navdeep what that conversation would have looked like if Mr. Massey was having an interview with a journalist, and whether the same messages that Owen has conveyed would be very similar for a journalist context.
Well, I think, a journalist would be looking for the hole in your briefs, as it were, looking at, what they could hang on to, how critical are you of the government, what does this mean, what are you basing this on, exactly what Owen is talking about, can you stand this up in 30 seconds, looking for the 30-second, if I was doing a television interview with you, I just want 30 seconds for my package, and you've got to explain that in 30 seconds. And politicians are superb at doing this. And it's one thing that you can learn from any interview that you watch about a politician. You might ask them the question 5 times. They'll give you 5 different ways of expressing the same answer. So whether they've come with a message and they're going to give you that message, whether you ask them 10 different questions about the same issue, they will come back. And that's what I think you have to bear in mind when you're talking to journalists. What am I trying to communicate to you, not what are you trying to get from me, because they will ultimately be trying to find the hole in your argument.